The top business stories, live from the Sky newsroom. Donald Trump unleashes a trade war with tariffs on Canada, Mexico and China, America's three biggest trading partners.
We may have short-term some little pain, and people understand that, but long-term, the United States has been ripped off by virtually every country in the world.
Markets slump with motor manufacturers taking the biggest hit as Europe and the UK brace for further tariffs to come. Plus, pain at the pumps, why petrol prices in the US are set to rise. A very good morning and welcome to Business Live with me, Darren McCaffrey, on this Monday morning. And there is only one place to start this morning, and that is that trade war that has erupted after Donald Trump announced tariffs on Canada, Mexico and China with a threat of more to come. It sent stock markets tumbling. We'll have a look at those in detail in a little while. But first, over the weekend, Donald Trump confirmed tariffs of 25% on Canada, which was quick to retaliate. Tariffs of 25% are also being imposed on Mexico. President Trump has also announced tariffs of an extra 10% on goods coming in from China. Well, speaking overnight on his return to Washington from Florida, Mr. Trump said that the tariffs on imports from Europe will definitely happen. But there's been no confirmation so far about any tariffs on goods from the UK. Well, let's speak to Henry Allen. He's macro strategist at Deutsche Bank Research. Henry, very good morning to you. He's gone and done it.
Yes, he has, Darren, and this is really quite astonishing if you think about where we are in terms of the global economy right now, because if these tariffs go ahead, and there's still, just under 24 hours, so let's see if they actually do, but if these do go ahead, these in total will be worth 5 times the total tariffs Trump imposed in the entirety of his first term. So this is, if anything, the biggest kind of shock to global trade we've seen since World War II. And for Canada and Mexico in particular, who do a huge amount of their trade with the United States, this is seismic. This, if sustained, would likely push both of their economies into recession, and in economic terms, it would be a shock bigger than Brexit was for the UK.
Just talk us through, Henry, for those watching at home, why, from his point of view, has Donald Trump done this? What is his rationale?
So I think it's twofold. I mean, in the executive order, it quite clearly says that he's concerned about the flow of illicit opioids into the United States. But at the end of the day, this fits into Trump's broader worldview that he's held since at least the 1980s, that if the United States is running a trade deficit with a country, he views that as bad. And he has also said, in his inauguration speech and throughout his campaigns, he wants to reorient the way the United States generates revenue away from taxes on individuals like income taxes towards tariffs. And actually, historically, that is not entirely exceptional. That's kind of what the US and other countries tended to do all the way back in the 19th century. It was much more common that they'd use policies like tariffs in order to generate revenue. It's only in kind of more recent decades that we've had taxes like VAT and others that have replaced them.
And they have, and obviously the size of the US state is achieved as well. What do we think will happen with the European Union and indeed with us here in the UK, Henry? We know that EU leaders are meeting in Brussels today, essentially to talk about security, but I've got little doubt that tariffs are going to be at top of the agenda as well. Are we thinking now that the EU is going to get hammered by tariffs and that they will obviously naturally retaliate?
I think there's a very strong risk of that, and markets are indeed already reacting overnight to that. The euro has fallen quite significantly against the US dollar, and of course Trump has said he's going to follow through against the European Union. I think with Britain, there's a bit more of an outstanding question because, at least according to the US, we don't run a trade surplus with the United States. In their own data, they run a trade surplus with us. Where it gets a bit tricky, though, is actually our data from the ONS tells a bit of a different story. We say that we are running a trade surplus with the United States. So according to press reports, UK officials have been trying to argue that the US statistics are right, that in fact, they run the trade surplus with us in order to avoid tariffs. So given what Trump said overnight, he sounds a bit more open that the UK might avoid them, but he certainly seems to be coming for the European Union.
And just very finally, Henry, in all of this, I don't know if you saw, I was talking to Will, our presenter, just beforehand, and Trump's a transactional man, isn't he? What's he trying to achieve with these tariffs in the sense that is he going to try and get a better deal from these countries? If they don't cave, are we looking at something that could be quite prolonged here? Bottom line, I suppose I'm asking, is how bad could this get?
I think it could be quite prolonged. And I think one thing that was really striking about the trade war that he pursued in his first term was that Biden, when he became president, kept basically all of those tariffs in place. And I think what we're seeing at a global level is a shift away from the kind of free trade orthodoxy that reigned for much of the kind of post-war period in favor of a more protectionist direction. So I think absolutely the risk is that once these tariffs are imposed, particularly once the relevant economies make that adjustment, it's much easier to see those linger in place than go back to the old free trade normal.
Yeah, it's interesting. Joe Biden, for example, didn't roll back many of the tariffs that have been imposed on China when he became president. Really appreciate your time this morning. Henry Allen there from Deutsche Bank Research. Thank you. Well, let's have a look at how the markets are reacting in detail. And frankly, it's not great, unsurprisingly. A sea of red there from Asia. Overnight, all the indices down. The Nikkei down more than 2.5% there. Here in Europe, again, it's been a very difficult morning. All of them down, almost more than 1.5%. And it is motor manufacturers that are taking the biggest hits. Places like BMW, Volkswagen, the kind of concern is they will be hardest hit. Here, the FTSE also down this morning, down more than a percentage point. Meanwhile, the dollar has surged, hammering sterling, which is down 0.72% at $1.23. Though, maybe given the fact that Trump seems a little more keen on us here in the UK, it is up against the euro at €1.20. And finally, let's look at energy prices, also climbing up. The price of a barrel of Brent crude up 1.51% at $76.80. Let's talk to Ross Moldau, Investment Director at AJ Bell. Ross, very good morning to you. This is unsurprising. The markets are all down this morning.
Yeah, good morning to you, Darren. It's in some ways it's weird because when Trump first won back in 2016, he was treated with a degree of caution and stock markets were very worried about what he might get up to. And in 2018, when he imposed tariffs, stock markets did go down. This time around, they've been remarkably relaxed, thinking that he's all bark and no bite. And now he's actually started doing the biting. They've gone back to it thinking, actually, maybe this isn't such a good thing after all.
And talk us through what we're seeing here. These markets are down across the board, whether it's in Asia, whether it's here in Europe. We're expecting similar in the United States a little later on. But there are particular sectors. I was talking there, wasn't I, about car manufacturers in Europe that have been really badly hit.
It's generally countries or sectors that are very, very, very heavy export-driven or cyclical and sensitive to the global economy. So that's why markets like Japan and Korea have been hit hard. Europe, you correctly flagged the automotive sectors as being challenged, and in the UK, miners have been very heavily hit. Again, they're plugged into the global economy. In Diageo, a major exporter of tequila and Scotch whisky into America, its shares are down. If you're looking for any comfort in the UK, the shares that were actually holding firm this morning and going up were Imperial Tobacco, Coca-Cola and Haleon. So something to get you through the morning, a can of Coke, a packet of tablets and a cigarette.
That's just my normal morning, Ross. So that's good to know. Let's talk about currencies, though, as well. The dollar surging.
Yeah, the theory here is that if America starts to reduce its enormous trade deficit that it's been running since 1975, that means fewer dollars flow out of the country and more stay in, which means, frankly, there's less supply of dollars, there's more demand for them, and therefore the price of the dollar starts to stabilise or indeed go up. And that DXY index, or Dixie, that's at around 110. That's approaching a 3-year high. Weirdly, what you don't really want to see is as an international overall is somebody outside the US is a really, really strong dollar. It's the world's reserve currency. If there is a shortage of dollars worldwide, that gums up the economic works and it gums up the financial industry plumbing. And we saw that actually in 2018-19 again. So that's maybe why markets are treading a little bit carefully.
And talk to me about what's happening with cryptocurrency. We'd seen a massive surge in particularly Bitcoin and others after Donald Trump got elected. And yet $200 billion has been wiped off in the last 24 hours.
Yeah, not my specialist area, Darren, I have to admit, crypto, but I think it's interesting. A lot of people view cryptocurrencies as a haven asset, a bolt hole, somewhere to hide when things get tough. That doesn't seem to be the case this morning. As you say, you've seen some big falls, Bitcoin down 5%, Ethereum down by a fifth, and that's there's maybe just markets are gone. Actually, I've been taking lots of risk. Now there are lots of uncertainties. I should be taking less risk. So that risk-off move, as it were, means that people are locking in some profits in some of the more speculative areas, like cryptocurrencies. Another haven asset, by contrast, gold, not everybody's favourite. It's pretty flat today at an all-time high.
Yeah, indeed. And where do we think this is going to go, Ross, in the sense of like how bad, the markets have now reacted to this, but there is the possibility that these tariffs just become wider, deeper, and last for longer.
I think they're the key variables. Is there a deal struck that persuades everybody to back off? Or to what degree does the retaliation get bigger and deeper? We get to a tit-for-tat situation, as we got to in the 1930s when, say, the Smoot-Hawley Act was introduced in America, which some economists would say contributed to made a difficult global situation an awful lot worse. You then got to factor in, what's the result? What do corporations do? Do they pass on these tariffs, or do they chew on them and take the margin hit, which is largely what they did in 2018, so inflation didn't spike? And then what do central banks do? Do they feel that they have to step in and try and provide some stimulus, which they did in 2019 to try and help the economy and get the stock markets back on track? So lots and lots of different variables, so many uncertainties. And again, that's why you're seeing the violent moves today, because nobody really knows what's coming next.
And Ross, just very finally, I thought what was interesting there, listening to Donald Trump, was talking about the short-term pain. There'll be lots of people saying that, he's obviously massively concerned about the stock market. He always wants it to be reaching new highs. He doesn't want to see the return of inflation, given the fact that it's one of the factors of his election win. And yet, a recognition from him he would argue at least, the short term, that there will be pain. But his argument is it's for long-term gain for America.
Yeah, and the long-term gain, he will argue, will come in the form of demand for cheaper domestic goods, which helps domestic output higher and creates American jobs. And he views that as a win-win. And there's no doubt about it. America's tariff revenues rocketed during his first term and have stayed at higher levels. So from America's perspective, there could be benefits. A lot will depend, again, what companies do. Do they pass on those prices or not? They didn't last time. That will maybe help on the inflation front, if nothing else.
OK, Russ, as always, great analysis this morning on a difficult day for the markets. Russ Moll there from AJ Bell. Thank you. Well, as we've just been hearing, oil prices are rising on the back of those tariffs. So how is it going to affect prices at the pumps? Let's speak to Francisco Blanche, head of Global Commodities and Derivatives Research at Bank of America Global Research. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Just talk us what's driving this increase that we've seen in the price of oil today, up more than 1.5 percentage points.
Well, thanks for having me. Yes, the main reason why we're seeing prices going up is because tariffs have been applied on Canadian crude oil imports, as well as Mexican crude oil imports. We'll see a 25% tariff as of tonight on Mexican crude imports into the U.S., which are about 800,000 to 900,000 barrels a day, some of which is re-exported. And then we have about 4 million barrels a day of Canadian exports into the U.S., into the Midwest for the most part, that will be subject to a 10% tariff. So that's going to force the U.S. potentially to look for barrels elsewhere. And that means that domestic U.S. prices have to go up to attract barrels, so to speak, from the rest of the world. And these Mexican barrels and some of the Canadian barrels will have to go to other markets.
What's interesting for me, Francisco, is that I have been told for years now that the United States is becoming energy self-sufficient. It doesn't need to rely on others. And actually, when it comes to gasoline, it does seem that they are quite reliant on Canada.
Actually, it's not exactly that way. I mean, if you look at the U.S. today, the U.S. is the largest exporter of petroleum products. We're looking between petroleum products and natural gas liquids, something close to 7 million barrels a day. It's twice as large as the second largest exporter of products, which has been historically Russia. So the U.S. is a very large exporter. But remember, the U.S. has its own rules when it comes to moving vessels around, and there is something called the Jones Act that prevents America from moving some of its internally produced barrels from U.S. ports to U.S. ports, and that creates a vacuum. So Jones Act is one of the things that may be looked at as these tariffs are put in place. But the U.S. Indeed right now needs foreign product from Europe, not so much from Canada, to your point, as a result of tariffs. But nonetheless, you could also pull back on the Jones Act. So I think you're creating a lot of trade distortions by throwing in the tariffs. But the net impact on U.S. Gasoline prices at the pump is likely to be somewhat muted. Maybe we're going to see 3-4% increase in prices, not dramatically more.
And I suppose, Francesco, that's my final question, is that we know gasoline prices, or petrol and diesel as we call it here in the UK, is a politically sensitive issue, isn't it? And maybe if it's manageable, that's why Donald Trump feels that he can get away with this tariff.
Well, I mean, in the short run, it can be manageable. Remember, the tariffs are also having a negative impact on the Canadian and the Mexican economy. And if these tariffs rolling out, they're going to have a negative impact everywhere else. So you're going to end up having a negative effect on global demand for stuff, including oil. So the risk of tariffs is escalation and a tariff war. In the short run, we see short-term upside on domestic prices. In the long run, it depresses the global economy and ultimately at least lower prices.
Okay, Francesco Blanch from Bank of America Global Research, thank you very much indeed for joining us live from Madrid this morning. And don't forget, you can get the very latest on the fallout from Trump's tariffs. Just scan the QR code on your screen for international reaction as the US begins to wake up and the American stock markets prepare to open in the next couple of hours. And at 4:30 this afternoon, we're going to have a Business Live special programme looking at those tariffs. We want you to send in your questions. We want to know what you want to know about this particular issue, which we will then put to a panel of experts who will join us. For instance, what a global trade war might look like, who might win, and how it might affect the pound in your pocket. Again, just scan a QR code to get in touch, send in your questions, and we'll be answering them at 4:30 this afternoon. Now, away from Trump tariffs, we've got some breaking news to bring you this morning on the future of Thames Water. Let's bring in Mark Lyman, our city editor. Mark, what have you got for us?
Yeah, well, Darren, some important news about Thames Water, which is, definitely going through the most consequential and complicated restructuring of any major British company at the moment. You'll remember that Thames is teetering on the brink of bankruptcy. It needs billions of pounds of debt and equity to survive. What I have learned is that KKR, the private equity giant, which manages more than $600 billion of assets globally, has now hired investment bankers and city lawyers to evaluate an offer that would see it play a crucial role in a rescue deal for Thames Water. Now, there is a deadline that's been set by the company and its advisors of later this month for interested parties to submit offers to inject probably in the region of £3 billion of new equity into the company. It's not just KKR that's in there. There is a big Hong Kong infrastructure group called CK Infrastructure Holdings, which is also interested. But in order to get to that point, Thames Water needs to win permission from a court in London to secure £3 billion of debt financing. Now, there is a hearing that's got underway this morning in London to hear competing arguments about whether that debt financing should take place. There's a group of creditors that wants to inject that money. The Thames Water's board has endorsed that plan, but then there's a rival group of creditors which says that that funding is too expensive and that its members should instead be allowed to inject that money. Now, the alternative to this, if the court blocks the plan or that money does not materialise, that the government would be effectively forced to temporarily nationalise Thames Water, which has more than 15 million customers, drowning under £19 billion of debt. And in fact, agitation for a nationalisation, which would probably cost the taxpayer billions of pounds, has been growing in recent days. And Charlie Maynard, a Liberal Democrat MP who has long been a campaigner for reform of water industry regulation, has issued a statement ahead of that court hearing this morning, saying that the court should reject the restructuring plan that's been endorsed by Thames Water. He says successive governments have watched on as Thames Water has plunged itself into billions of pounds of debt. Thames Water is running out of money, it's operating in breach of its licence, it's unable to pay its debts, and its customers are suffering for it. And all of this takes place against a backdrop where Ofwat, the industry regulator, recently determined that Thames Water should be allowed to increase prices for consumers by 35% over the next 5-year period. That's far short of what Thames Water was calling for. So there's a lot of moving pieces still in relation to the future of Britain's biggest water company.
OK, a complete mess, isn't it, Mark? I appreciate your time on that this morning. Mark Clapman, our Art City editor. OK, you're watching Business Live on Sky News. Up next, Donald Trump has unleashed that trade war. Will it turn global? And will he win? That's next.
I'm Dominic Waghorn, Sky's International Affairs Editor, covering a world that seems to be unravelling. War, unrest, revolutions.
It's not his country, it's ours.
They have succeeded for the first time in their country's history in removing a leader from power. No freedom! Sky News, the full story first. There was fighting here, but there's clearly now a lull, and they're using it to bring up more ammunition. This is a mass exodus in which Russia is hemorrhaging some of its brightest and its best. According to the local weather channel, there have been more than 2,500 lightning strikes and flash flooding, all on top of this week's lethal tornado. What stays with you most in this job is some of the people you meet. What is your worst fear about what the Russians want to do to the children?
They're just boosting demographics by stealing young people.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here? Mr. Trump, are you running for president? Can you confirm it?
We're going to take a look, a very serious look.
On that day, we saw your fighters killing women, killing children. Was that a mistake? Did you go too far? You couldn't control your fighters? The full force of the state is being used to crush any protest. Free wherever you get your news. It's half an hour now past the deadline that Hamas issued, and we've now seen a third barrage of rockets coming in. Another alarm. The mood here is jittery and nervous. We're seeing the world get more and more divided, and it's our job to try to make sense of it all.
Weeknights on Sky News.
This is your chance. Tell people.
Welcome to the Politics Hub.
Our police force has apologised. If you want to find out about Grimsby, you come to the docks.
I'm live in Jerusalem.
Are you not concerned that that could lead to all-out war?
Hello there, good evening. There are fears of an upsurge in violence. What's at stake here?
You are watching the press preview, a first look at the front pages as they arrive.
It's like Emirates. It's like better. It's like Emirates. It's like better.
Here's trade war, but will it go global? And if so, what happens next? Who are the most likely winners and losers? Delighted to say, I'm joined by Rebecca Harding, Chief Executive at the Centre for Economic Security and the author of 2 books on trade wars. And I suppose that's my first question, Rebecca. We have been here before.
Yeah, absolutely. And this feels a little bit like Back to the Future, except that the world is a very different place to Trump 1.0 when this happened last time. So, I mean, at the moment, Trump's going about breaking things. He's breaking affiliations with big organizations like the World Health Organization, but he's also breaking up a lot of the trade relations and imposing tariffs all over the place. So this is a very disruptive time that we're living in at the moment. And it's risky for everybody.
It is, Rebecca, but from his point of view and from some of his supporters, they would argue it's because the current system, globalisation, if you like, has not been working for tens of millions of Americans. Or indeed, some people would argue for lots of us here in the UK too.
Yes, and I mean this is the compelling view. He and his advisors aren't convinced that all of those institutions that we have believed in and called broadly the international rules-based order, they don't work anymore. They don't. We've had various advisors to Donald Trump saying the international rules-based order doesn't exist anymore. It's not something that works. It's not something that we believe in. They believe very strongly in the US dollar, but they don't necessarily believe in those institutions of the international rules-based order because they create unfairness, they create trade imbalances, and they create inequalities as well.
Does America just win this through its sheer size of scale? I mean, it's the world's largest economy. It'll be able to absorb any of the pain a lot more than, let's say, Canada or Mexico could do. My bottom line is, however this plays out, America wins. Is that true?
Nobody wins from a trade war, and I think that is the most important thing that anyone can say. We had trade wars back in 2017, back in 2018. They were quick and easy to win. What they actually did was fragment the global economic system. So it fragments all of these institutions, all of these relationships of global trade that we know about and understand, globalization, if you like. What it does is, in the short term, it pushes up prices, it increases economic uncertainty for everyone, not just elsewhere, but America as well. Now, the bet at the moment is that America is strong enough to be able to withstand that, as you've said. And this is all about America. We have to remember that it's all about America. But how strong the US dollar is, how influential the US is against the might of China, for example, that's something that we're going to see. What is happening now is that we're seeing some very big changes.
Rebecca, really fascinating stuff, uncertain times, as you say. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Rebecca Harding there. Thank you. Well, that is it from me on Business Live for this morning. Now, a reminder that at 4:30 this afternoon, we're going to have a special programme looking at those Trump tariffs. Please do scan the QR code on your screen now. If you've got a question, we will endeavour to answer with a range of specialists and experts at 4:30. Do join me then if you can. Up next, it's Wilf with the rest of today's news, and I'll see you a little later on this afternoon.